This is University Lecture. Welcome to another in a series of lectures given on the campus of Iowa State University in Ames. Today we present another lecture from the 1971 National Affairs Institute on the American Indian, as Jim Hina and Hane Gigoma of the Bureau of Indian Affairs discuss the operations of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. First, Mr. Jim Hina.
Not knowing to what extent the students, faculty, and so forth wanted to hear about the operations of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, I came here unprepared and was hoping to get some ideas from students, faculty members, and so forth about what to talk about. After spending some time here on the campus, I decided that in order to give a clear view of the operations of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, it was going to take like maybe about 50 sessions of this type, and knowing that many of you, perhaps for the first time, will be hearing about the operations of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, about the kinds of conditions that are predominant on Indian reservations throughout the country, it's going to be very difficult to take in all at one setting all of the complexities involved in the so-called Indian problem. I would like to say that my feeling with regard to the Indian problem is this, that the American Indian, as described by federal people in terms of the Indian problem, is, I don't see it in my mind as an Indian problem. I see it as a human problem in which American Indians are involved. With that, I'd like to proceed with the short presentation I've prepared for this afternoon, and afterwards I'll ask Mr. Gigoma, who is up here on the stage with me, to assist me in answering any questions that you may have. I'd like to begin by describing the historical background as far as the Bureau of Indian Affairs is concerned. The Bureau of Indian Affairs was first created in the War Department back in 1824. Now, those of you who are students of history, I don't think need to be told that the reason for establishing the Indian Service in the War Department was because in those days the United States government was waging war against the native people of this continent. As a result of the various wars and so forth, there were treaties signed by Indian tribes with the United States government. In those treaties, lands were set aside for the exclusive use and ownership by Indians in wherever these areas were designated. This was the establishment of the Indian Reservation, or the restricted lands, which many people today talk about. In many of these treaties, there was also extensive language dealing with the protection and the promotion of the welfare of the citizens of those reservations. This was a responsibility that the United States government assumed as a result of the Indian tribes giving up certain realty or real estate for these kinds of services. Well, in 1849, the Indian office was transferred to the Department of Interior, where it is now located. I believe that it was transferred to the Department of Interior after the cessation of the Indian Wars, primarily to begin to provide the kinds of services and the kinds of protection of the lands that were necessary in those days in order for the United States government to live up to its commitment as far as the treaties and other agreements were concerned. I believe it was about that time that the guardian-ward relationship started. The assumption, and I'm sure it was a correct one, was that the Indian, during those early days, was not acquainted with the language of the dominant culture. They weren't wise about the ways of the dominant culture and all of these kinds of things. Therefore, the people, on the part of the United States government, who were brought in to protect and to provide the kinds of services that the government had agreed to, assumed the guardian role, assumed that they were dealing with a group of people who were like children and who were not really qualified to manage their own affairs. So the paternalistic attitude developed as a result of that. And through the years, this paternalism has been reestablishing itself year after year after year. It's been slowly changing. We might also throw in here that there were many good things that were done in the minds of many people in this country with regard to the Indians, especially one which they thought was going to resolve the then Indian problems of those days. I believe it was in 1870 that the General Allotment Act was passed. Basically, this act was to provide a means for Indians to assume responsibility in their rightful place as citizens of this country by having them sign a certificate that said something like the individual signing this certificate was qualified to manage his own affairs. When this happened, the government designated 160 acres for his exclusive use and ownership. So here, an Indian was able to sign on a piece of paper, whether he could write in English or not. He was able to sign, he was given 160 acres, and that was his. It no longer belonged to the tribe, it no longer had the protection of the United States government. Well, once the Indians moved out on these small 160-acre lots, they learned that because they were not qualified in certain skills in order to get and retain jobs and be able to afford to pay taxes on these properties, they began to lose out. And as a result, non-Indians bought these lands out from under Indian ownership. And this is where much of the real estate, as far as Indian ownership was concerned, changed hands, so that today there is only about 50 million acres of land that is still within the ownership of Indian tribes, whether they be under the Allotment Act or under the Restricted Status Act under which most reservations come. But through the years, the Indians have become acceptable to the changes in their own attitudes. They've been more receptive to gaining and acquiring an education, not only in the elementary grades, but in the high schools and so on into college. So that today we have many Indians throughout the country who are educated, who have degrees from various universities and colleges, who are advocating the involvement of Indians in the decision-making process of the BIA. But I think the things that we have been hearing most recently have been said by many of us in the years past. At that time, it wasn't customary for Indians to get up before a large audience and say the things that are being said today. But it was done as many as 10, 12 years ago by a number of us throughout the country. We were saying some of the same things that are being said today, and I think gradually the attitude within government began to change. They began to become noticeable, at least, to the result that they were running into. I think many of us who were born and live, like myself, I still live on a reservation, we come to the system. We are the result of the education that the Bureau provided for our reservations. And it's rather sad for me to listen to people who are now realizing that there are Indians that are qualified, that can assume some of these responsible positions. The only thing that they see is that Indians are coming on board and they're going to replace non-Indians. They don't see it as a result of their effectiveness in the training programs, in the education programs, that because of their effectiveness, Indians have learned and are now acquiring responsible positions in government and various other places. It's rather sad, but that's the way it is. I think especially within the last 2 to 3 years, there has been a lot of talk about more involvement on the part of Indians in the decision-making process. And this is not only true within the BIA, this is true within our universities. We hear students wanting to be involved in the decision-making process as far as administration of universities and colleges are concerned. Also with regard to national government policies and so forth. People are wanting to be involved. So this is not, in my opinion, anything different. What is happening within the BIA is no different from what is happening generally in the whole of society here in America. This is largely the historical part of the BIA. They're responsible primarily because the government agreed to provide certain things. They agreed to protect the lands and so forth, and this is why the BIA is there. Now, as late as July 8, 1970, President Nixon came out with what he called a message on Indian affairs. In that message, he emphasized that there was a need for the involvement of Indians in the self-determination of their destinies without the threat of termination. Now, what do we mean by termination? To an Indian, termination means that the government, the Congress in this case, can arbitrarily decide that they have lived up to their commitments, to their agreements as a result of the treaties and so forth. The Indian people do not feel that this should be or can be an arbitrary decision. They feel that if any termination of federal services, federal protection is concerned, they need to be consulted and they need to have an input into why the government can remove itself from assisting Indians throughout the country. Another point that the President talked about was the establishment of an Indian Trust Council. This would largely be a legal department within the Bureau of Indian Affairs, wherein the Bureau of Indian Affairs with this legal office could then advocate and also represent in the various courts Indian interest in these courts, so that protection is continued in terms of litigating, adjudicating tribal rights to minerals and trespass rights and so forth. The President also talked about improving the economy on the reservations. In talking about these kinds of things, the Congress appropriated a few additional dollars during the last fiscal year, and the Commissioner of Indian Affairs established what we call an Indian Development Fund. This fund was set up, it was distributed to the field agencies closest to the reservations, guidelines were established. The basis for doing this is to allow Indians to become owners of businesses right on the reservation. Today, when you visit a reservation, almost all, I would say 99% of businesses located on Indian reservations are owned by non-Indians. And the move towards getting more money is to allow the Indian to borrow from this fund so that he can establish himself in business, so that the economy on the reservation improves. One of the things that the President did was to support the return of Blue Lake to the Taos Pueblo Indians. This was recently enacted. The President signed this thing into law. The Taos Pueblo Indians now have returned to them 48,000 acres, which will be maintained by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And I think in line with some of the things that the President spelled out in his special message to Congress, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, Mr. Lewis Bruce, announced on November 27th 4 new major policies that will govern the activities of the Bureau of Indian Affairs at least during his administration, and hopefully during the rest of the existence of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. These areas are in dealing with the redelegation of Commissioner's authority to the field offices. Presently, within the Bureau of Indian Affairs, we have an organizational structure whereby there is a central office in Washington. There are area offices, 11 of them located in strategic areas throughout the country. These people have line authority. Then from there on, you go down to the field offices. The field offices are the offices that deal directly with Indian tribes. Anytime a request is made by an Indian tribe for certain kinds of programs or projects, it has to be reviewed at the agency level. From there on, it's sent up to the area level where it's again appealed, and then from there on up to the central office. Well, what the attempt now is to remove the second layer of authority and make those offices into technical assistance service centers. Will largely be staffed by the same people, but they will play primarily a technician or expertise role in terms of assisting Indian tribes and the field agencies closest to the reservation. A new policy is with regard to reassignment of administrative and management personnel. We must realize that the employees who are employed within the Bureau of Indian Affairs are civil service employees. And I think most of us know that civil service employees do have certain protection. And because of this, and because it is a federal operation, Indians have not been allowed to sit in on the discussions or evaluations in terms of hiring people for filling certain vacancies. The reassignment policy will, as much as possible, allow for this. For instance, the key administrator at the field office is the superintendent. Well, up until recently, no Indian tribe has ever been given the opportunity to review the qualification records of an individual trying to obtain that position. But now they can do this. They can review the qualifications of a civil servant in the BIA, and if they feel that they have a member of their tribe or they know someone whom they feel can qualify under the civil service requirements for these kinds of positions, they have the option to nominate their own candidates. And once this is done, people from the Washington level will come out and negotiate with whatever tribe is doing this and hopefully come to a just solution of the problem. But I think presently the commissioner feels that he is going to go with the recommendations of the tribes who make nominations for candidates in these key positions. Another change is in establishing a new system for contracting with Indian tribes. One of the greatest need among Indians is to get them to experience the responsibilities of managing and administering programs. And through the vehicle of contracting, the option is provided to Indian tribes to contract some of the services that the Bureau of Indian Affairs now performs. For instance, say X reservation feels that they have among their own people qualified people that could fit into the administrative positions, into the clerical positions, and so forth. And they come into the Bureau and they say, we want to contract this whole agency. This would mean then that the Bureau would contract with that tribe, and the funds that were initially provided to the BIA, which the BIA expended to operate that agency, would then be turned over to the tribe. They would then hire their own people. Now, in many cases, they could be the same people that are employed now, but it is hoped that Indian tribes will recognize that they do have these kinds of responsibilities and will be able to make determinations on the basis of professional qualifications and so forth. job skills and not in terms of personalities. You know, he's a good friend of mine, therefore I want to give him a job. But this is the avenue that is now open to Indian tribes, which they haven't had. We might say that there is some reluctance on the part of Indian tribes to accept this new arrangement because they see it as a disguise towards termination. Again, we use the word termination very advisedly because termination is a very strong scare word as far as Indians are concerned. And I think we need to define what we mean by termination. I think, you know, in my own mind, termination to me means that the Congress is the only body that can terminate the agreement as far as the treaty and so forth is concerned, or the restricted status of Indian lands as it affects them in terms of termination. These are the kinds of protection that the United States government agreed to, and I think Indian tribes are going to hold them to it for as long as possible. On the other hand, there are services, and I can see that as Indians become better educated and so forth, they begin to move into the competitive society and begin to take on jobs. They have incomes and so forth, and they begin to operate just like any other citizen in this country. And at some point in time, I can't predict when, the service end of the government's performance is going to just live out its usefulness. And perhaps at that time, termination on the part of services may transpire. I don't expect to see it in my lifetime. But I think we need to really define, you know, what we mean by termination. Another important policy is a policy of evaluation and inspection. Here again, this will involve the Indians. And what will happen there is that Bureau officials and Indian officials will sit in and evaluate and inspect the operation of a field office in terms of the effectiveness of the key administrators, whether or not services are being brought to the field so that Indian people that need them are benefiting, and so forth. And also, Indian tribes will be able to look over the shoulders of federal employees and check them in terms of, well, we don't think you should be doing that. And so I think these four policies which the Commissioner recently announced are very good policies in terms of establishing or creating a mechanism by which Indian people are going to become involved if they want to. Now, we hear a lot of talk about we want Indians involved in the decision-making process, but there are a lot of Indians out there that aren't quite prepared for that. And so I think when we talk about involvement, we have to qualify exactly whom do we mean. Do we mean the urban Indian or do we mean the reservation Indian? But I think as far as we are concerned, as far as 1970 and 71 is concerned, the name of the game is going to be involvement. We are going to try to interest Indian tribes in becoming more involved in the daily decision-making that takes place at the field level and at the central level. We're going to try to change the Bureau's image from a management agency to a service agency. And we expect to play the role of a catalyst and an advocate as far as changes in legislation, changes in regulations are concerned, which would make the Bureau a more responsive agency rather than one that is restricted because of federal regulations, congressional acts, and so forth. I think we need to point out that I've hit on it a number of times, but again, I think we're talking about attitudes of people. We have about 15,000 employees in the Bureau. Some of these people have been in there 10, 20, 15, 30 years, and they're working towards retirement. Mr. Gigamal and myself, I think between us we have 4 months in the Bureau, and we're not really looking forward to retirement from the Bureau. I think we're looking for change. We're looking for the kinds of changes that will allow Indian people to become involved. Among the Indians, there's also the attitude of, well, the government is moving in that direction. They want us more involved. And by showing that we can do those things means that they're thinking about terminating us. there's a historical distrust on the part of Indians of the non-Indian. Look what happened to us, and all of these kinds of things. These are built-in problems when you're talking about tremendous changes. But I think much needs to be done. The education level on the average of American Indians is 5 years. The life expectancy level is the average of 44 years. The housing among Indian reservations is about 75% in need of repair. Unemployment runs as high as 40% on some reservations. Reservation development, the development of the economy on reservations, is almost non-existent. And so I say much needs to be done, but it can't be done by the government alone. It has to be done in partnership with the Indians. And if the Indian people see the new policies as the mechanism which will allow them to be involved, I think we're going to see some tremendous changes over the next few years. I think one of the most important things that I would like to see as a result of the new policies is to be able to establish a National Indian Advisory Council at the Washington level composed of elected officials from among tribal leaders to represent Indian interests at the national level. I see this advisory council as a council which can address itself to enacting new regulations, new laws, and changing the old ones that inhibit the BIA and the federal government. And to be effective, because the BIA is a federal organization, an arm of government, there needs to be these kinds of changes before real effective change can take place. Maybe we want to ask Mr. Gigamon to
I don't know how my name got mixed up. I was supposed to send in a VEDA, and some people in our office in Washington didn't do it. It's a BIA mistake. My name is Hene Gigamon. I'm a Kiowa from Oklahoma, and I'm 24 years old, and I graduated from the University of Oklahoma School of Journalism, and I raised hell for 4 years, I think, as a member of the National Indian Youth Council, and I've picketed BIA facilities all over the country, and have written scourging editorials against the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. I'm a sort of a would-be playwright, and one of my plays is called The Trial of the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. And you can just imagine that I still have that play, and I still intend to hopefully get it produced someday in New York. But I am only at the Bureau since the 1st of November, and my job is basically public relations. Now, I know that would bring a laugh from people who have certain ideas about the Bureau of Indian Affairs, public relations, and the BIA. Well, I got into this situation because they found out that I was a young Indian journalist in Washington, and then I had worked on several newspapers, and I had written quite a few things about Indians, and also that I was an activist, and that I had written some very powerful editorials against the Bureau, none of which, by the way, had any effect. And not really, no effect at all, zero. So this was very frustrating to me, and let's see if I can pull this down. And I got the idea, so many people were telling me, the only way that the Bureau of Indian Affairs is ever going to be changed, and some of my fellow activists were telling me the same thing, the only way that we're ever going to be able to change the goddamn Bureau of Indian Affairs is to do it from within. And that never really did sink into my head. I always thought, I was so bitterly anti-BIA, or I thought I was, I felt that I was, that just any mention of association with BIA was such an opprobrious thought that I just didn't even want to think about. It was silly. But I gradually began to see the futility of my efforts in raising hell on the activist side. And I think a lot of other people have on various activist organizations have done the same. I don't think that Abby Hoffman will be the same person a year from now. I don't think he's the same person he was last year. Where is Abby right now? It's a good question if you think about it. But anyway, I started thinking about this, changing the Bureau from within. So I got to meet the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, Louis Bruce, and I told him, I said, you know, I never have read a good thing about you. And I'm not a fool, I don't think. I'm sure that there are some things about the Bureau of Indian Affairs that aren't really terrible, aren't really like they were described in Our Brother's Keeper and like Vine Deloria says they are. I know that that's not true. I know that the story's it's only about half true. So then he started telling me about this new program, which Jim touched on, his new policies, and how he is really going to try to make the Bureau of Indian Affairs an organization that will really do what it's supposed to do for once and for good. He said it wasn't going to be an easy job, and one of the big problems, he told me all about it. They gave me a sort of a sneak preview of the new policies, and he told me that one of the big problems is going to be communicating this new program to Indian people. Well, I sort of fancy myself as being able to communicate with Indians to a certain level. So somehow it was worked out that I would come to the Bureau of Indian Affairs to work primarily on this program and to do whatever else might come along. And I have been acting as a special assistant to the commissioner on that. But I told the commissioner when I went there that I wasn't going to start trying to peddle BIA falsehoods, lies, and things like that, because I just couldn't do it. And he told me that he didn't think that that would be necessary, that he was going to try to really change BIA. And I thought that, I figured that here was my opportunity to see if I could go into the BIA and do something possibly to help change it, to get Indian people to better understand what is going on with BIA, especially with this the whole new picture that's developing in Washington and out in the field with the BIA. Here is an opportunity for me to accept a challenge, to quit griping and complaining and screaming and yelling, and to really go in, and it's sort of like being called to the Christian service or something. Here's my chance. But that's how I took it, and that's what I'm doing with the Bureau now. And when I say, I'm trying to avoid using that term public relations, because people always sort of giggle whenever I say public relations for the BIA. But I do that, and but it's primarily with Indian people, and it's primarily a communications process that we're developing with Indians, and we're talking with Indian people constantly. We've been all over the country, and I've known Indian people for a very long time. And there is a special way of communicating with Indians that a lot of non-Indians just have no idea what it's all about.
Certain ways that would mean something entirely different to you. And you just have to know this, and you have to be an Indian to feel it and understand it and appreciate it. So I'm trying to work all of that into the thing too. In addition to getting publicity like for the new programs where it counts, like in Washington with the Washington Post, the New York Times, all the big papers, trying to get them favorably to support the efforts of the commissioner, which I believe are good, so that people like in the White House read it, in the Department of the Interior read it, you read it, everybody that reads it, everybody reads it that can write to a congressman, that sort of thing, saying that it's a good program, and it's worked out fairly well up to now. The problem, as Jim said now, is not the problem, but the situation now has come to the point where it's now up to the Indian people to decide if they want to take this opportunity that has been given to them.
And I say given, and that sounds sort of condescending, given from you white people. Well, that's a sad kind of irony given to them. But that's exactly what it comes down to in hard, cold political facts. Washington has said, here's the new program. It come down from the president, and it trickles down to the BIA. It's given to the Indians. All right, so they have an opportunity and they have a chance. All the rhetoric and sadness aside. And it's now up to them to see if they want to come through with what they've been asking for a long time. If they really want to try to change things for them. And the BIA stands ready, I think, at last, to start changing itself. It's on the verge of a metamorphosis process of changing itself so that finally Indian people can run it, or will ultimately run it, and will be able to spend what money there is for BIA as they want it. The individual tribes need it, and onward. And the door is open, I think, now, for once, and finally, for the Indian people to really get down to the work of helping themselves get out of the scene that they're in right now. And the reason I'm at BIA is because I think that I can help a little to do that. And if it doesn't work out, I can always go to work somewhere else. We'll be happy to answer any questions.
This table wasn't set up for a panel today. It was for tomorrow, by the way, and this was supposed to be just a presentation, though these people are very willing to answer questions if you have them at the present time.
One listener had this question. Many people are critical of the BIA and say that most of the commissioners and people of the BIA are scapegoats for the government, and they're calling them Uncle Tomahawks. And I wondered if either of you consider yourselves as Uncle Tomahawks.
Personally, I don't give a damn what you call me or what they call me, as long as I have the opportunity to try to get done what I have agreed with myself and the Commissioner of Indian Affairs to try to do with the BIA and the Indian people. And my friend Lehman Brightman, who's coming here tonight, has called me a sellout, much more bombastically than saying you're a sellout. It's much worse than that. And my friends in National Indian Youth Council have called me that. Apples, radishes, anything. I don't care. I thought about that whenever I made my decision to try to go aboard BIA and see how it is on that side. And so personally, they can call me anything they want to, except what my incorrect tribe. What Jim wants to say about that.
Well, I learned a long time ago. Is this thing on?
Yeah, you're on.
I learned a long time ago that if you worry about what people are going to call you or what they think about you as an individual when you're trying to do a job that needs to be done, you're never going to get the job done. So I learned a long time ago that, people are going to call you names, they're going to accuse you of this and that and so forth. But if you're really conscientious and interested in improving the social and economic conditions that exist on these reservations, there's no need to worry about whatever you're called. And the only thing that I can say is that people who are doing things very often are criticized. People who don't do things, you don't hear about, pro or con.
Let me ask you a question. Are you impressed when you hear some Indian shout at another Indian, you apple, you radish, you tomato? Or does that impress you? What does it make you think? Or insecure, maybe, something like that. I'm not trying to lead you into that answer, but I just wonder.
How do you feel about the Red Muslims?
I don't know I don't think there's an actual organization called the Red Muslims. It's
No, there isn't an organization, but you might be interested in knowing that the commissioner, Mr. Bruce, has brought in at the executive level 20 people. Of the 20, there's 15 of us who are Indians, and we've been labeled different things, among which is Red Muslims, Bruce's Braves, Bruce's Young Bucks, Bruce's Militants, Bruce's NIYC Kids, and so forth. So it seems like even we, who are in the Bureau and who are trying to initiate changes, are being classified in terms of the so-called Red Power movement. But I think that as far as we are concerned, we're working towards those same things from the inside, where they're pointing out the deficiencies from the outside, and we're trying to address ourselves to these deficiencies from the inside.
It's really funny that thing about being on the outside, looking on the outside, or the inside, or being on the inside, looking outside. It's a different. Once that's happened to you, once you're out of school or something, and you get into that kind of situation, it's really strange. You feel from having been on the outside, hammering so long, then all of a sudden you're way on the inside, sort of at the top or near the top, and you see things entirely differently. It's an experience. You just got to keep it in perspective.
Another listener had this question. It seems to me that part of the Red Power movement is the effort to maintain the Indian culture. What do you think of this goal, and how realistic do you think it is, and how much is the BIA pursuing it?
Well, I think any individual who is interested in retaining his culture needs to practice it himself. I come from a reservation. I speak my own language. I participate in all of the activities that take place on a reservation with regard to social as well as Indian religious activities and so forth. I am proud to say that I'm Indian. I don't have to go around telling people that I am an Indian, that I practice my religion and so forth. I kind of wonder about people who talk about retaining culture and so forth, as to what extent they themselves practice and or preach or conduct activities that would promote the retention of culture within the tribes. Even Indian leadership talks about retaining culture, but I don't see any organized activity on the part of Indian leadership in terms of sitting down young children, young adults and so forth, and trying to teach them our way of life or our language and so forth. So, until I have seen an organized program where these activities are going to be conducted by Indian leaders, by advocates of retention of Indian culture and so forth, then I'll believe it. In the meantime, I am an Indian. When I come out here to meet with you folks, I'm on a competitive basis with you people. When I go back on a reservation, I'm an Indian, I speak Indian, I communicate with my people at their level, and I do things their style. And to me, living in one culture and being able to operate in another culture is simply like walking through that door. And on one hand, I'm an Indian in one room, I go to that door, I have to be able to manage myself in the competitive style and lifestyle of the dominant culture, and which I'm willing to do.
Yeah, I'll try to answer give my. First of all, just a while ago I was asked, what am I doing with the suit on? Why am I not wearing blue jeans or something like that? Well, I think I can wear anything I want to, anytime I want to. And it just depends on me. I don't think that my wearing blue jeans or a G-string or anything up here would make me look more Indian. I just don't think that. Sometimes if I go to a powwow, maybe I'll dress a little more loosely. I wouldn't wear a suit to a powwow. And I'm not wearing a suit because I'm trying to impress you people, because I have no interest really in doing that. But I don't think that you have, I agree with Jim, I don't think that wearing beads and Indian power buttons and that sort of thing is preserving culture. I do think, though, that a definite effort is needed, a much more serious effort is needed on the part of the Indian people to preserve their culture. I do think that the Indian culture is really dying at a more rapid rate than a lot of people realize. It's really sad to go some places and see just what a terrible state the Indian culture, or the culture as we have sort of had it textbook to us, the condition that it's in. One of the things that I'm involved in, I was telling you a while ago about my plaything, some of my friends and I are right now working on the establishment of an American Indian theater ensemble, and to be set up in New York City on the 1st of March, which a consortium of foundations is funding, to do plays and entertainments for and about Indians, and all Indian acted, all Indian performed, staged and everything, to be done on reservations in urban ghettos or wherever Indians are. That's one thing that we're trying to do. We're trying to do movies about Indians, a lot of other things. I am working on a proposal right now to present to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs for the establishment inside the Bureau of Indian Affairs of a Cultural Affairs Office that will develop a program for working with anthropologists, with sociologists, psychologists, all kinds of academic people, with Indians, with everybody, to take a kind of a reading of just where the Indian culture is exactly, what its chances are of surviving, or what chunks of it are of surviving. But I do think that it's in much more danger than a lot of people realize. And the idea of Red Power promoting a kind of a pseudo culture is fine. I mean, it's the idea that I think what they're promoting more is Indian identity more than they are actual Indian culture or ethnology. And I think that the Red Power movement has done a very fantastic job in generating interest in Indians to identify as Indians. And I identify as an Indian, and it doesn't make any difference to me whether I'm wearing the proper button or the proper attire for the proper situation. And I told somebody the other day, if you will, I know that I'm an Indian because if I fornicate with an Indian girl, I'll have an Indian child. And that's all that really matters to me about being an Indian. I mean, that's the end result of it. And then the culture that we give that child, will be Indian. So that's how I can do it. And I can help other people to do it by encouraging this sort of thing.
Dave?
I'm not sure what you're encouraging vis-a-vis your remark.
Vis-a-vis.
My question was, the Meskwaki Indians here have stated that they want to maintain the present school that they have. They've had some difficulty doing it with litigation. And furthermore, they want to expand, I think, potentially, or reclaim their school, kindergarten through high school. With this DULA in the BIA, what are the chances for that?
The question is relative to the Meskwaki wanting to maintain the present school and regaining a school from kindergarten through 12. What are the possibilities within the new look of the BIA?
We were there this morning at the Meskwaki school. We went with some of the Meskwaki students here. They were our host and took us out there. And we found out some things about the school. And all I can tell you, as far as I know, and I don't know about Jim, is that when I get back to Washington, I'm going to find out some more about it and then try to pursue it from there.
So I think what I can do is bring this to the attention of the commissioner and also to the attention of the people who are responsible for these kinds of programs. And if it is the wish of the tribe to do this, then I think plans ought to be made in terms of, planning for those kinds of things to take place. But just to expect the tribe to make a request today and have it done next week is very impossible, because you know that the Congress appropriates the funds, and the Congress determines how the funds are to be expended. And therefore, in my opinion, I don't think this kind of change can take effect overnight. It has to be planned, the funds have to be provided and so forth. But I think as long as the tribe wishes and expresses this to the local agent and up the line and so forth, that eventually someone's going to pay some attention to them. And in the meantime, those of us who are directly responsible to the commissioner can also relay this information directly to him.
It had to be done that way. Right now, that's all I think that either of us can say about that. But we were there and we saw some things there, and I think both of us intend to find out more about that situation. I think he has a question.
You talk about culture disappearing. You talk about culture dying. Culture, in case you're not aware, is being killed in schools today. While you're back in Washington, I suggest you look very carefully. The hiring practices of teachers in an area I happen to know quite well, San Carlos Station, Arizona. The cultural mismatch between students who are generally have a chance to speak when they come into school, and the 50-year-old Texas retiree school teacher are almost 100% complete. And I think while we sit here and we talk about ensemble theaters, we talk about cultural centers, things I agree with in intent. I think there are a number of basic problems involved. And I think both you gentlemen, if I may say so, are quite acculturated. This is neither good nor bad. It's people participating. It would be nice if the Cherokee someday could elect the leaders that are having appointed. I think these are the things we need to talk about. And I think maybe we're really not talking about them today. I'm not saying anything negative against you, gentlemen. You have a job to do. You are apparently committed to it, so that I commend you. But I think there are a lot more serious problems that apparently we're touched on, or maybe we'll talk about.
Are you suggesting that I or Jim disagrees with you? Because I'm
No,
not.
I'm not suggesting. I'm saying someone hasn't done something.
Yeah, I know
And
that.
You are the seeds and the germination. But all I can say.
I think I used that alliteration on the radio program this morning. I'm not alliteration, but that hyperbole of the seeds, this whole thing.
You know, the problem is that, we realize that these kinds of conditions exist. And like you're talking about the San Carlos Reservation, they have an elected tribal council. That's the body that's responsible for seeing to it that these kinds of conditions improve. And so, what you're asking us to do is play that paternalistic role again and to go down there to San Carlos and say, look here, Mr. San Carlos Tribal Council, this is what we think you ought to be doing. But we feel that it's their responsibility to indicate to us and to initiate requests and so forth in order to make those changes come about.
Well, I have a series of requests made for the restoration of the medical aid. And I don't know whether you know.
The what?
Medical aid. The whole.
Well, that's a public health service. It's not a responsibility of the Bureau.
Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Well, okay. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm upset with the conditions on the reservation today, and I think that.
So am I.
And I'm not saying we're not.
All right.
Let me make this statement. That regardless of whether you're responsible for it or someone else is responsible for it, this is one of the problems with BIA, that you people must well know, that the buck gets passed rather frequently, rather regularly. And often, I try to talk to people, and I get shunted and shoveled, and I don't do the same thing. What I'm saying is I commend you on your work, but I want to make a statement today that possibly someone who is not hired as a hiring faculty of teachers on a group, and I'm not going to set priorities.
Then I lose you because you're just making a general sort of sweeping kind of thing that I don't quite understand.
You were talking about hiring a retired 50-year-old teacher.
Listen, I would like, I want to get going on a lot of other questions.
No, but I just wanted to clarify that, I think when you talk about hiring a retired civil service employee back into the Bureau might be a mistake on your part, because I think what you're talking about is the hiring of a retired civil service employee into the OEO.
That go on reservations in a sense hired, because they're not.
Yeah, but there are different kinds of programs on that reservation. I'm talking about San Carlos. There's an OEO program. Yeah, and in the OEO programs, the tribes hire the personnel. And in some cases, they have to hire retired civil servants, because those are the only people that will come back and live in these isolated situations. And, there are factors that determine these kinds of outcomes. And I don't know what the policy is in the Bureau about rehiring people that have already retired, and that's why I was just raising the question, because in my own mind, I think what you're talking about is the OEO program.
I understand. I think I have some kind of dig on your frustration, and I haven't come up here. I didn't want to come up here and say, yesterday 3 Indians committed suicide. Yesterday 500 Indians died or nearly died from alcoholism. I'm not really interested in promoting that kind of information, which I think has been around for too long about American Indians. And I get just a little frustrated whenever I come up with somebody who immediately quotes me the suicide rate of Indian children and who immediately tells me about the death rate of Indian babies. I know all of that, and I'm sure that a lot of other people know all of that. And I'm sure that things are being done to correct that. I don't know exactly what's being done right now to do it, but that to me seems kind of like a negative begging the question too, to immediately start off with that. And we all read Our Brother's Keeper, we all read the books, we all know the figures, we all know the tragedies. I think that there is work being done to combat this kind of thing and to change it. And I think that more needs to be done. I know that more needs to be done. But you can't just do it all at once. These kind of things are not resolved just overnight, all at once. I used to think that. I now see differently.
But I do think, though, that the people who should know these things know them, and I think that what can be done right now is being done, and I think that there are plans that are in somebody's mind somewhere that's going to be able to implement them to do something about that. And that's all I can tell you, that I don't see any rosy future for the Indian people in this country. And at the same time, I don't see any rosy future for the non-Indians in this country either. There are rough days ahead, and there are rough days ahead for the American Indians especially. But I do think, though, that there is enough intelligence and enough determination, and I think that it's developing very nicely. I think we're toward the situation where Indians are going to be able to help themselves. Expertise-wise, on their tribal councils, there will be Indian lawyers, doctors, whatever. Eventually this will happen, and the picture's getting better. The kids are slowing down on killing themselves and that sort of thing, I think. Really, I didn't say that facetiously. And it's things are beginning to improve, but I think that the picture is so vastly sorry and shattering, if you really see it, that it's going to take a long time, and there's no such thing as a rosy future, because life is rough, and you only get rosy, dreamlike worlds and utopias when you're on pot or something. But they just don't exist in reality. Life is just too harsh for that, and it's always been harsh for the Indians. And if life gets even 25% better, it'll be a hell of a lot better than what it is now. And if I can bring about 25%, I'll do it.
Yeah, I'd like to do some summary and perhaps make just a slight different tack than some of you who have attacked the Bureau of Indian Affairs so severely, and again admitting I am no specialist in Indian affairs. But I would suggest to you that there is one large, well-organized, and well-financed organization in the United States that has some concern for Indians. I mean one and one only, and that's probably the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And it would seem to me that if you're going to start thinking about what can be done for Indians, and what direction can we go, the most powerful organization to accomplish these goals is the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And the point, it would seem to me, that these gentlemen are making and are contributing to through their endeavors within it is to change its direction so that it can come much more closely to the goals of the Indians themselves rather than the goals as perceived by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It would seem to me then it should be the goal of the Indians and those who are supportive of the Indian groups to seek to support the Bureau of Indian Affairs through these types of people who are seeking these changes. It would seem to me this is the direction we should be going, not to be critical and damning this particular organization, but seeking its change and then providing support to it. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
You have been listening to another in a series of lectures given on the campus of Iowa State University in Ames. Today, Mr. Jim Hina, a member of the executive staff of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and Mr. Hane Gigoma, public relations representative of the BIA, discussed the operations of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The discussion was recorded this past January at the Institute on National Affairs, Indian First Americans Last. University Lecture is a presentation of Iowa State University Radio.
I expect the Bureau to be more responsive.
Let me ask you one thing. Mr. Antel is from Minnesota, right? Minnesota University? He's not non-Indian, right? Is he Indian?
He's Indian.
What tribe is he? Do you know?
He's the Chippewa.
Has he worked with the BIA? Yeah, right.
Most of us did.
Okay, let me show you. Let me give you an example very quickly of the kind of problem that BIA is facing, and I realize it very much. He was telling us what Mr. Antel said last night about the reorganization policies, and Mr. Antel said, by his own opinion, that he didn't think that these policies are going to work, right? That's what. Right. Now, you heard him say that, right, because you just reported it. Okay, do you sort of agree with him? Okay, so, all right, so you don't know. All right, so which of us are you going to believe? You know? I mean, he doesn't like it, or he obviously doesn't care for it. We like it, you know. So where does the tug of war end? Where does it begin? You know? When is it ever going to get leveled out? You know? He says one thing and convinces a lot of people that he's right, and we say one thing, not necessarily trying to convince people that we're right, but it just goes on down the line, you see. And this is the situation with BIA. Whenever something new has come out, a lot of people who feel who have anointed themselves as critics of BIA or whatever, watchdogs of BIA, say, hell no, it's no good, no good, you know, right off the bat. So just the Bureau has this atmosphere, this miasma about it, that it can't ever do anything right and really all of a sudden get somebody behind it. It takes forever, and by the time forever is over with, it's time for something new again, you see. And it's just that kind of situation that the Bureau's faced with. Right. Well, one of the problems is, and I think Mr. Heenan outlined in his speech, is that you have the difficulty of civil service, and all of these people are protected by civil service, right? Now that's something that is a thing that the white American government, if I may, set up. All right. So it's now one of the things that has the Indian situation locked in a choker. Because not entirely, but because of the people who now are dysfunctioning in their jobs, and yet they're still protected by civil service. So again, you know, how do you get out of it?
What we are trying to do to address ourselves immediately to that problem is to try to establish a system by which Bureau employees can transfer into other bureaus within the Department of Interior. We are also exploring the possibilities of making it easier for Bureau employees to transfer into other departments, you know, from the Department of Interior to other, like Commerce or HUD or wherever. But I think we just can't ignore the rights of the civil service employees. And so I think, you know, very often what happens is Indians who say, well, get rid of that guy. It's not that simple. I've been associated with cases where administrators have terminated civil servants, and they have appeal rights. And it works just like your court system. The higher it goes, at some point along the way, somebody might reverse your decision, and you have to take him back. You're forced to take him back to give him his back pay and so forth. And it's an expensive process. And we have to be satisfied in our minds that we do have the evidence to substantiate our decisions. And very often, people complain about individuals because of personality differences and so forth, not really getting down to job performance.
I think a lot of the difference is that